Okay, well, we've got 10 out of 10 participants that have done the poll. And as you can see, hopefully here, can you see the poll results? Hopefully you can. You can see that 60% were in favor of homework assignments. Well, let's start up the top. Everybody's said they would benefit for some degree of certification, which is good to know, because that's certainly our plan. And so the homework assignment was plus minus, it would be voluntary. And then lastly, are you a current user of ChatGPT? And a little bit surprising that many people are not. So that really, to me, strengthens the reason to go ahead and present this, particularly ChatGPT in the face of education. In other words, how can you use it? Universities some are dead set against it, and others have leveraged it. So you have two camps. So let me just look at my announcements. I have one thing I wanted to demonstrate before I turn over to David for his talk on ChatGPT, is that I wanted to show you something at the last month's session. Shingarai brought up a very important question that I had no immediate answer of, and that was, well, wait a minute, what about sample size? Well, the answer all along, if you read anything in data science, is get me more data, get me more data. Well, what is enough data? And so what we did is I'm hoping you can see this graph, and let me get the pictures out of the way. Over on the right here is basically we generated 5,000 of the heart patients, the heart disease prediction patients, and then we randomized it multiple times and downsampled it. So it started with 5,000, randomized, took out 2,500, then 15, then 1,000, then 500, and then each time performed the usual AUC accuracy F1 precision. And the point is, you can see sort of an early change as you get up around, say, 1,500. Clearly, there's improvement. But, and I say but, it continues to improve even beyond 5,000, and log loss, which remember is the difference between the predicted model and the actual model, so you want it to be as low as possible, continues to drop. So to make a long story short, we hope to be doing more experiments with synthetic data to try to show, is there such a thing as an optimal sample size? So a great question that came out of this workshop. So with that, though, I'm going to go ahead and stop share and turn it over to Dave.
Okay, I hope you can see my screen. Good. All right. So ChatGPT, as Bob mentioned, an incredibly polarizing topic in the world of education and higher education. I see Bronsberg nodding his head. Yes, I teach in Stephen's organization, his department, Health Informatics Department at Nova. And I also teach at Kettering University, the School of Management, or a graduate program. Kettering, a few weeks ago, has put out an announcement to all students. If you are caught using GPT for your homework, you will fail the homework assignment. If you are caught using GPT for your class final project, you will fail the class. And all of us instructors at Kettering are now expected to use GPT-0, which will catch if people are using ChatGPT for their assignments. So Kettering has made an incredible stand. So now this presentation I'm going to hold very shortly is, I feel like I'm a Dr. Jekyll hat I got to put on at different times, and it's because at Kettering I am a GPT policeman, and otherwise I could take that hat off. Now, let me explain. I don't want to criticize Kettering. See, Kettering is caught off guard. Their entire graduate program is based on discussion board assignments. It's all on autopilot, and it's all based on essays you have to write and discussion replies to others, discussion posts, and it's all essay based. 90% of everything is essay based. So along comes GPT. GPT's been around for a while, GPT-3, but along came ChatGPT and just gave anybody a perfect cheating opportunity for essay assignments. So Kettering was caught kind of flat-footed with that situation, so they had no other choice but to make that decision. So let's get back to my presentation on ChatGPT, where I'm telling you, always recruit ChatGPT as your AI-powered project team brainstorming member. Now you might say, okay, now you can clearly see I've taken off my GPT policeman hat when I say things like this. And there's very interesting opportunities for us to use AI as augmented intelligence and not artificially using intelligence to cheat like crazy, to be lazy and not do my homework, but let GPT do it. But I'm teaching currently a student in my Lean Six Sigma black belt through my company, and I am encouraging him, and at the same time he's going through this black belt class, I'm also mentoring him on solving a real life, very big problem in his organization. And I am encouraging him to officially put ChatGPT as one of his project team members officially in his project charter. You would say, what, are you crazy? Well, let me tell you, there's a tremendous amount of data analytics that have to be done. ChatGPT can't cheat on that. There's not a whole lot of essay things that need to be done, but I got to tell you, I've experimented with this excessively in the last few weeks. Exactly how good of a team member can GPT actually be if you're asking it to contribute in brainstorming exercises? And I practice this, and I am very pleasantly surprised. And I've listed on this page, I don't want to read all of them, but I'm rattling through all the different Lean Six Sigma tools as an example, and finding out exactly how it can help with problem solving. But what I want to focus on today is where you can see the big star next to, the 4W, the fishbone diagram, the 5Y, identifying the right data. If you remember, and if you look back in our 8-step process for data science, the first question is, what are your research questions? You need to spell those out. Then the next question is, do you have the right data? And I got to tell you, and I'm going to move on to the next slide here, is what I find, and again, this is experience of, I've mentored well over 3,000 green, black, and master black belts in Lean Six Sigma, and they always have to collect data for their project. Without data, they have nothing. And it's the same thing in the world of medical research. Without data, you have nothing. Without an AI project, you have nothing without your data. And I wanted to tee this up a little bit here where I talk about, QRCF. You need to have high quality and correctable data. If it's not corrected from the beginning, you need to be able to correct it. You need lots of rows. And Bob and I are doing a lot of very high-end data experiments using some other sophisticated, what's called synthetic data, to find out if I got small data sets, how many more artificial patients can I create? And are they statistically significantly the same as the patients that I created them from? And then do I have lots of columns? And this is where I see most problem solvers, when they start out a project, have the most difficult problem trying to brainstorm, okay, what kind of data do I really need? And then also the last step, the last bullet here, do they have the appropriate number of calculated features? And I put there like length of stay. If you have 2 dates, let's say you have a date, my start of care and my end of care. Or you might also be interested in knowing what is the length of stay during the analysis, because that might correlate with something. We call that a calculated feature. Well, guess what? One of the biggest weak links I've seen of over the 3,000 Lean Six Sigma black belts I've mentored and certified is that they always have problems figuring out how to brainstorm what are the right types of data points that I should be finding. What type of data should I include in my research? And that is, I'm going to tell you right now, ChatGPT does a great job. This is not cheating. This is helping you solve a real life problem. If you're trying to do research to, improve diagnosis of a disease, I don't call that cheating if we're having ChatGPT help us out a little bit in making sure that we don't forget some of the important predictors. And it does a great job of doing it. And I've done a lot of testing on that. And as a little example here, what I want to show you, it's a very popular, in this book that Bob and we use a tremendous amount of standard machine learning data sets. And the reason we do that is because they're used by, the data science community, and everybody compares. All right, now when I analyze this data set, I come up with this answer. When I analyze it, I come up with this answer if I do this and that and that and this. So what's interesting, if you take this diabetes data set and you look at it, what do we have? We got 442 patients. We got 10 predictors, and at surface, it doesn't sound too bad. I get this data set one of two different ways. I have a continuous target variable of the value for diabetes, or I have a categorical target that says, yes, you do have diabetes, or no, you don't. And if you break all this out into the different who, what, when, where, and why categories, you see that this data set only has one who, gender. Everything else is a what. What is your blood pressure? What's your age? What's your LDL? What's your total cholesterol? So it's a little bit imbalanced. And for those of you that have had my Lean Six Sigma classes, you will know that these are very typical charts. You see here what I call the 4W brainstorming, and we have then a fishbone diagram, and then we have a tree diagram. And we're always using this at the very beginning of a project to have students and researchers brainstorm. Do you have the right data? And giving you a little help with these brainstorming tools to make sure that you don't miss something that might be an important factor that correlates to the problem. Now, here's a tip. If you start out your brainstorming event, and I'm testing this live with a with a black belt that I'm certifying right now, and all right, show me your brainstorm of your data set. And first, now I say, are you happy with it? Yeah, I'm happy with it. I say, oh, can you expand on it? They'll think about it a little bit. They'll talk with their team, and they'll come back with a semi-mediocre expansion of that data set. I hate to say it, that's typically the case. And then what I'm telling them is, you know what? Ask GPT if it has any recommendations, and specifically ask it, tell it the problem, tell it what the project scope is, and say, what other additional who, what, when, where, and why categories do you have for your project? And I don't expect you to read this, but we're going to send you a copy of this. Within a matter of seconds on this diabetes data set, it blasted out all of these different ways in the who, what, when, where, and why category of suggested data points that we should be collecting. Obviously, a clinical expert has to go through this and look at this, but this is, let me tell you, and I've brainstormed this with many other problem solvers in the past, it would take a subject matter expert at least 45 minutes, them and a few other people to knock off the same type of list that ChatGPT would come up with. And here's my point. Have a look at this graph. It's a little slices. Now you look in the front, okay, how many who, what, when, where, and why different groups did I have for classic on this classic data set? I had a total of 10. Like I said, I only had one who, I had several whats, and I had no whens, wheres, or whys. And if I look at the 28 features that ChatGPT knocked out in a matter of seconds, it came up with 28. That's pretty good. And the good news is they're pretty well diversified over the who, what, when, where, and why categories. And if you remember what we talked about in chapter 2 about going backwards, the data science process always likes to go forward, right? But when things go wrong, you have to go backwards. For example, if your model performs very poorly, you go backwards and try to find out one of the questions you should be asking, did I miss some data? Did I miss collecting some data? Well, let me tell you here that, ChatGPT came up with 28 features and this data set only has 10, so it's right away off the bat. I wouldn't expect it to have as good a performance as if I had all the 28. And if you look at the back slice here, this is saying, all right, team, you came up with 10 features. GPT-3 came up with 28. Let's kill the overlaps. And what do we have? We have, a combined best practice team effort of 33 features that we should have been collecting data on. And anything, machine learning, problem solving, AI, if you don't have the right data, you're not going to get very far. So this should be step number 1 on your projects. And you should not be forbidden to have ChatGPT do a sanity check if you miss something. We're not telling ChatGPT to do all the work. We're saying, hey, this is the data I have. I actually feel kind of comfortable with this, and I'm ready to just call it a day as far as my data collection. You should be asking ChatGPT what it thinks, and you say, oops, I should really have 33 as opposed to 10. It's a really good sanity check. And what I'm hoping with this experiment, with this case study that I'm doing with this black belt that I'm training right now, that this will hopefully be one of the first case studies where we're actually actively using ChatGPT, not to make shortcuts, but to supplement, to augment the intelligence of the problem-solving team. And I think it's a great topic. And there's so many things we could talk about ChatGPT right now, but I wanted to, in this dialogue in the beginning here, just first of all, talk about how it can help you strictly on data collection ideas. All right, so Bob, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over 4 of the orange widgets and then turn it over to Dave so we're not constantly going back and forth. Dave, if you'll handle the chat. So I'll go ahead and start with data sets. I'm going to open that up, and this is a nice freebie from Orange where they have about 65 data sets here. They tend to be referenced. Let's go up here to some of the ones you use, like liver disorders. Can you predict the presence or absence of liver disease? Tells you there are 345 instances, or in this case, patients, and there are 11 predictors. In the category, it's a binary classification. In other words, it's categorical: liver disease, yes or no. And then they have a bunch of other breast cancer, trying to predict whether you're going to have recurrence of breast cancer. And then this one, there's actually 3 or 4 breast cancer data sets. Be aware of that. This one is larger at 683, and it predicts benign or malignant based on pathological or microscopic features of the tissue. So this is a pathological. And so there are other ones here, but notice they also give the reference down here. This is a famous, and I don't remember what BUPA stands for, but the point is it's a fairly famous one. And that reminds me about something else. I don't know if you all routinely visit this University of California Irvine machine learning repository, but they've launched a beta version of it, which is way more modern. It has some more recent data sets that are larger. So if you go there at the top, look for the beta version. I think it's better than the old version, just to remind you of that fact that they don't advertise that. So there are the heart diseases in there. There are other fun ones like the wine, trying to predict the highest quality wine. So there are maybe 10 medical data sets in here. Some of them are fairly, they're probably better off for like a cellular biologist or whatever. And there's also survival stuff that we'll eventually get to. But for just classification and regression, you can find some in here. So there's 65. You just double click on it and look in a, like this is the liver disease one, you connect it to a data table and just look. So the class is 1 and 2 rather than 0 and 1, but it gives you some liver function test, the amount of alcohol drunk and so forth. It's just an example if you want to test these out. All right, the second one is interesting because you might say paint data, well, that's just a toy. Well, it's a very important educational toy. When you can start presenting data, let's just cluster one, let's just make some data go out. So you can create a linear projection here, univariate, in other words, one variable, and then connect that, and you can actually figure, in fact, let's do that. And so we've connected to a scatter plot, and there you go. So it X and Y axis, you can play with it, but the R value is 0.91. So this is a very linear type of data projection, if you will. And remember, next month we'll be going to data visualization and spend a lot more time on this. But that's just one example. Let's give another example. Let's make another cluster. When we do unsupervised learning and you're trying to see how this works, this is very valuable. So now you have cluster 1 and cluster 2. Scatter plot, see, shows you 2 clusters. And we'll go in more detail, but what I'm saying to you is sometimes in the absence of data, you can create your own data. In fact, in Python, if you look at any of the books by Jason Brownlee, he just tells Python to generate 1,000 something. It has no name. You don't know what it is, what the category is. You don't know if it's economics or medicine or whatever. And here you can do whatever you want. You can rename it. You can play with this, but this is a sandbox to try to get to know the relationship between X and Y, or let me just go over that so you understand. And so here we've added a third one. That's greenish. So now when we get, again, to unsupervised learning, where you're trying to go into a data set that you've never seen before, has no labels, it's just data. Unsupervised learning will find these clusters, and then you can evaluate further. So the paint widget is your friend. All right, next one is select columns. In each case, I'm going to use the heart disease prediction data set. So we open select, and this can be valuable, and sometimes you have to correct it, like gender. You send it back out and send it back in as a predictor or feature. So now you have a target, which is diameter narrowing, and then you have all your predictors up here. So you're good to go. So this is not bad as a reality check, just to be sure you've got everything where you want them. And then when in doubt, which I've said many times, always look at a data table to say, yep, target looks good, age, everything else looks good. The columns are correct. And then my fourth one here, and these are all fairly easy ones, is edit domain. You can change the name. For instance, diameter narrowing causes confusion, and that I'm not sure who labeled it that. As we've said a couple of times, all these patients had cardiac catheterization. If they had greater than 50% narrowing, of a coronary artery, they were labeled heart disease. If they had less than that, they were labeled no heart disease. So it's a 1 and a 0, if you will. 0, no heart disease. 1. This is imperfect. We all know that. But that's how they did it. But the point is, diameter narrowing is klutzy. So you would just say heart disease 0 and 1. So here I've relabeled it, and you hit the apply button, and then you go to the data table, and now it says heart disease. And you can save that then by putting, anytime you do anything like that, you just go to the save data widget and save your file with the new labels, if you will. So those are my 4. We can probably save questions to the end, I guess. I'm going to look at the chat in a second, but I'm going to stop share and let Dave do 4.
Okay, bear with me. Let's see here. I'm going to open up my orange file first of all. Can you see my semi-blank orange canvas?
Yes.
All right, real good. So I'm going to talk first of all about the file widget. And here you see it's just floating around. I just put it in there. And you can't do anything in orange as far as analysis is concerned unless you start with the file. Now, why is that the case? Well, let's double click on it and find out. Bless you. So when you open up the file widget, it says, well, what data do you want to analyze? And you have a few different options. You can click on this folder over here, and it'll say, okay, now do you want to go into your desktop and find something, or do you want to do something else? So let me get out of there and say, no, I want to go somewhere else. And I do not want to open up a file. I want to click, see over here, it says browse documentation datasets. If you click on that, you will find 6 standard datasets. And Bob and I, we use the heart disease one very often. You could say, yeah, that sounds like a good one. Let's open up the heart disease. And what has it done? It's opened up the heart disease data set. And here I'm not viewing it like I would in Excel. It's viewing it strictly on, what are the names of the column headers? What type of data is it? And very importantly, it already guessed that Bob had already mentioned, diameter narrowing.
Dave, we're not seeing it.
I'm sorry.
I see the file widget, but I think it must be opening on another screen.
Yeah, we can't see anything after the file widget.
All right, let me try this again. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Good.
I got to share each one of those individually. Yeah, thanks. Let me know if that happens again. So here you see, I'm looking at this data set for the heart disease, and we got lucky with this data set because Orange is very familiar with it because it's one of its documented data sets. So it already knows that diameter narrowing or heart disease, 0, 1, 1 for yes, 0 for no, is the target. But if you open up, you pull a data set from your desktop, from the internet, it will make a guess if it feels comfortable with that. And if it doesn't, you need to click. See, I'm left clicking on the word target, and I can make that a feature if I wanted to, not a target, or I could just have it skip it altogether or go back to making it a target. And I could do that for each one of these roles, for each one of the columns in the data. Now, there's another thing. When the data comes across into Orange, if it's not messy, it's going to know, and again, I'm in the file widget, it's going to know, it's going to make its guess. Yeah, it's categorical or it's numerical. or something else. And then you want to go through that and make sure, yeah, you say, yep, everything's good, everything's fine, and I'm good to go. So you then go back to the, you could go back to the role in your OWS file, your workflow. But before I do that, I want to show you this question mark widget on the bottom left. Now that's going to open up a different window. And in that help file, and you probably can't see that, I have to share that separately. Okay, let me know if you can see the file.
Yes.
Yes.
Good. So when I click help on the file, you say, all right, now what can I do, and what are all the tips and tricks for any one of these widgets? This happens to be the file widget. Well, you click on it and this window opens up and you scroll down and to give you all the tips, some of the things we're mentioning and some other details. And what's good, it'll show you an example workflow. And, again, what is a workflow? A workflow is, well, I have to first do this and then I do that. So it's a logical flow of activities telling you of what you have to do first, second, third, and fourth. And then, so it's telling you how to load your data. It's showing some examples and other types of formats. So the help file in each one of these widgets is very useful. So that is the file widget. Now, the next widget.
Dave, could I interject one thing?
Sure, please.
There is a URL option in the file widget, and why that's important is there are data sets out there on the internet, for instance, at Vanderbilt, that have a URL, and when you put in the URL, it loads the data automatically, so you don't have to download and upload. It goes directly. And also another pearl, I hope, is another reason. So see the URL option under file?
Right here is what
that
Bob's
I
talking
encourage people to use Google Sheets. Why? Because it's an online program that has a URL. So it's very expedient or efficient to use Google Sheets and put your data in that way as a CSV file or an Excel file. So I'm mentioning that as an added benefit of the file widget.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Bob. So you see, you got the URL way of getting data in. You have the file on your desktop or your computer way of getting it in. And then you also have the browse documentation data sets. So I'm going to get out of that and go back into my OWS file. And whenever we say OWS workflow, that's just the funny name that Orange gives for its files. So what we're looking at here is an OWS file. If I save this and send it to you, that would be an OWS file. So the next widget I'm going to talk about is the data table. So here I can.
What are you looking?
So I pull something off over here and I say data table. So here's my data table.
What are you looking?
Now,
the wire for this, I can charge it.
I hear
Please
somebody-
set
I
your
hear
mic
somebody-
on mute, please, if you're not presenting.
so what is the data table all about? So if I click on the data table, at any point, and like I showed you when we were when you click on the file, it doesn't look like an Excel spreadsheet. But if you want to look at something that's similar to an Excel spreadsheet that shows all the individual data, you then add a data file at any point in the workflow, and it's going to look like this. Can you see that, or do I have to share that separately?
Yes, sir.
Is it there?
No.
No.
Okay, bear with me. And so now you can see it. Now, so here, when I click on the data table, this gives you a very different view of what your data looks like. It's showing you very much like in Excel or Google Sheets. It's going to show you can scroll up and down, side to side. What do all the different columns and data points look like inside there? If I want to click over here, visualize numerical values, it'll do that. And it's kind of showing you high numbers versus low numbers. So, you know, there's a few different advantages you have compared to a normal table, but that is the data table itself. Let me get back to the main workflow again here. And then we have what's referred to, I'm going to move this over here off to the side, this data table. Now let's say that I actually want to do an analysis of that data, that's heart disease data, and I want to send it off into a test and score widget. And to do that, I want to first of all, you know, data sampler. So I'm going to say, I start typing in data sampler. Now in the data sampler, what does that allow me to do? Well, let's double click on it and find out. And I have to stop share and then go back and then share what that's going to look like. And what this is, as you can see right now, the data sampler, when you're doing machine learning, you're going to typically split your data into what's referred to as a training data set, and then also a testing data set. And the typical default split is 70% for training data and 30% for what's called test data. And you can see that's the default here. And so it's automatically set up for that. So I'm going to stop sharing on that and go back into my workflow. Go back to my workflow here. And if I typically would continue on with why do I split my data? Well, I would want to build a model. If I build a model, I'm going to put in here, I'm going to have a test and score. And if I'm testing yes or no for heart disease, I might want to put in a logistic, regression type of widget and connect that over here to the test and score. And then what I also want to make sure that I do from the data sampler is not just have one line coming into where I'm testing and scoring that algorithm, but I want to double click on these lines. These lines actually have different default settings. So watch this, I'm going to double click on the line, and you probably can't see that, so I have to stop share and go back and share specifically that. And that may or may not show up. Can you see the line that it links it?
Yes.
Okay. Now what you want to do is you want to set two parallel paths, the data sampler to the data, and then the remaining data. What did they say? Well, what's remaining data? Well, that's what's referred to as the 30%. We're going to call that test data once I get to my test and score widget. And the data sampler, which is the 70%, we're going to send that into the data. And then I say, okay. And then I get some information there. Now, if I wanted to, let's say for my file, I wanted to select very specific situations. And that's where we get into the select rows. Let's say in the select row area, let's say if I were only interested, not in the entire data set, but very specific people. Let's say females that might only have a very specific lab result. Then what I could do is I could double click on the select rows, and let me stop sharing here and share back into that widget information. And you can see here that I could, under diameter narrowing, I could go under and I could say, for example, age is equal to, and say age is, I could say is greater than, and I could put in a number. Age is greater than 50, And so I could set certain conditions, and I could add different conditions. And then later, if I wanted to, I could look at just those individual patients of interest that I was interested in. And if I wanted to add a condition, I could certainly do that. I could say, all right, no, I have a certain age and I have a certain gender, is female. So now what I have here is I have all the conditions set up, that where I have only females that are above the age of 50. And what that'll do is break out that data set, and I have it set to send automatically. So it's sending that information somewhere. Let me go back into my OWS workflow. And again, the handy dandy data table. I can always add that anywhere I want to when I want to look at what the data looks like. And I could look over here, of what's going on and see if certain things were, broken out in a certain manner that I wanted to break out. If I want to do scatter plots just of that specific data set, I could do that. So it's a different way of segmenting your data, not only in logical stratification groups, but in very specific splits of continuous variables, below this value and or above this value. And then if I want to only look at those patients, I could do that. And by the way, I have the test and score widget clicked over here from the data sampler. And then so I open that up, and you've heard us talk about here different modeling metrics: AUC, CA, F1, precision, recall, log loss, and specificity. So we have all of these different types of which you can't see right now. So I have to stop sharing and share that. Bear with me so that you can see it. So this is what it looks like when you're inside the test and score widget. Now, you see right now in the bottom, I have test. So what this is, what does that mean? Test on test data. Well, what it's telling you, this is taking built the model based on the 70% that I had it trained on in the data sampler, the random 70%. But this is saying, this is testing how good that model is being used as a predictive model for the 30% that I put on the side that this model, this algorithm has not seen before. So this is a fair comparison of these are the predictive metrics for that model based on data it hasn't seen before. And if I wanted to see how the model trained on itself with all the data that it has already been seen, I would click on the top opportunity, which is the cross-validation. And then eventually when it's done calculating, you can see here, and it takes a few seconds because this is a smaller data set, it then gives you all the model metrics for that. And typically, the data it sees and the model it's building, it's going to have better metrics for that than data that it hasn't seen. And then we're always trying to narrow that gap between, a model that's, how well does it do in a model that it's trained, and then how good is it doing on data that it hasn't seen. And that's where we're always doing little tweaks on the model to try to make it a better predictive model. So this is leading into the test and score widget. So let me get out of there and go back into sharing my workflow again. And you can see here, these are the 4 widgets that I was talking about, in addition to the ones that Bob was talking about, to give you a workflow. And this workflow, we started out with, the file that, again, recapping that shows you what data do you want to use. And then we looked at various places I could plug in the data table, the data sampler of splitting my data to my 70% train, 30% test, and then sending that off into the test and score widget for the analysis using the logistic regression algorithm. Now, there's other algorithms that I could add to that. There's quite a few algorithms. Now, the more algorithms you add to this analysis, it's going to take longer to do the analysis and take longer for the test and score widget to come up with a result. And if you have a huge data set, it might take several minutes. It might take some hours. I've had some situations where that I've had it analyze several different algorithms on a few 100,000 different data sets. that I actually had to wait until the next morning till I actually got the answer. So the data sets we're trying to use in this class are relatively small, and the operations we're using are not too complicated where that, you're gonna have to wait overnight for you to get the results of the example. But if you are doing machine learning on complex data sets with very large amounts of data, large numbers of columns or a large number of rows, do not be surprised if it takes a longer time for the data to be calculated. And it's not any kind of mistake that Orange or any other predictive modeling software or R or Python are doing. That's just how long it takes to calculate these things. All right, so I'm going to stop at this point and open it up for any discussion that might have, many of you might have any discussion of anything that showed up into the chat, and then we'll take it from there. Bob, do you want to talk about anything that showed up in the chat so far?
Well, I wanted to mention that I put in a new poll. I tried to, number one, share the results of the one we just did. And then what I was attempting to do, but I don't see it as a new poll. I may have to terminate this one before we can see the next one. Anyway, what I was attempting to do, and I would appreciate some feedback, is, we're working hard to generate a comprehensive textbook. Question to you all is, what percent of you feel it has to be a print book? The reason I say that is going to be quite extensive. I'm not sure we can get a commercial publisher to publish a 500-page book with over 200 diagrams or images. I think it's not cost effective for them. I'm pretty sure. And so my question in a sense is, would you all be able to deal with an ebook? Yeah, sell it on Amazon. Well, again, the selling part, Sedalia, you raised your hand, I see. You want to unmute?
Yeah, I was just saying that I think a PDF is fine. I think, like, for example, me and my boyfriend, we buy the books and then we get always the PDF, and we tend to use a lot of the PDF nowadays. So maybe people are different. Sometimes I buy the book anyway, but we end up using the PDF more. So I think you'll be fine with the PDF version.
Again, I've done this with my informatics books now for well over 10 years. And most instructors are okay with ebooks, but a few absolutely hardcore insist they must have a print book. So it presents an obstacle in a sense. The ebook's easy. You can sell that. You can rent it. My informatics book is on Red Shelf. Very easy to do. But it's just that the print book, if we go to 500 pages, we're going to have to do some serious, thinking about what are our options and what not. Also, when you're at 500 pages, you have to say, well, maybe it should be 2 volumes, because otherwise it falls apart. The binding is an issue. So just trying to look, yes, ebook is sort of and I have to be honest, the option I really want doesn't exist. I don't know how many of you all use UpToDate for medical references. It's kind of the medical Bible, if you will. It's a subscription model. I'm not aware of that for a book like this, nor am I aware of any open source software that will allow us to post an ebook online that you have a subscription, and we constantly update, say every quarter or every 6 months, we're publishing a new version, which in data science could be incredibly important. So David, you put in here Patreon. I don't know what that is. You want to unmute and tell us?
Yeah, it's basically a subscription to your content.
Okay. Again, did not find that on my searches. So I appreciate that. I want to consider any and all possibilities, because again, we want this to be an extremely cutting edge book that does stuff that nobody else does. right now, when you look at data science, I don't care, data analytics, whatever out there, if it's going to have exercises, it will demand a programming language. Otherwise, it's just a general discussion with no examples, no images. It's just a discussion. What does a data scientist do? Yada, yada, yada. We want something that's very valuable. Sedalia, go ahead.
Can I just say something, Bob? You know, these classes are very, very useful. I always, you know, take a lot of lessons learned on my project as well, since I'm now starting. I would say, if there is a way for you to share this type of work that you do somewhere on social media, for example, maybe create your own channel, share what you're doing, and then share your ebook and find a way of using it. For example, I've done some Patreon before, like I've used Patreon to pay people that I follow on YouTube that I find useful. For example, I follow a person called Pension Craft, and what he does is provides financial literacy for people in a very research-based, evidence-based approach. So initially, I just applied for his Patreon. So I would pay like £5 or £10 a month just to contribute for his work. And now, for example, he created a website subscription. So I just subscribe to his website, and I get insights, and I, for example, use that to communicate with this community, find other like-minded people that and are interested in financial literacy, and you get extra content. So perhaps this is something that you could explore. I would say to you, look at the Pension Craft business model, because it's more or less it's a very research-based, evidence-based, and it's for finance. But I think for these types of things, I think you can find a way of doing it as well.
Oh, I appreciate that. And sort of related to this, and David, please speak up to this, is that our goal is to have a certification, formal, online, lots of videos, use the book as well. I don't have a timeline at this point. We hope to finish the book by early summer to have it ready to go. It's sitting on the desk of Springer Nature. They've not responded. I have a feeling they're going to be overwhelmed by how big this book is. But these are the things we need to know. And again, also even the audience, because a lot of times when I present, Dave and I present no-code data science to informatics people, they kind of just shake their head and don't know what to make out of it. They fall into two camps generally. Those that are going to go the programming route and get a master's degree, and everybody else that's not going to do any programming. So we're trying to fill what we believe is an important niche. And but it's not clear who's going to be receptive, because not only do students have to be receptive, faculty has to be receptive. So we're still feeling the water, testing the water a little bit. But the goal here is to have a meaningful certificate. David, you want to contribute to that?
Yeah, I've for the past 25 years, I've been certifying people in Lean Six Sigma, and the model they have there is, yellow, green, black belt, and master black belt. And we're kind of thinking of, following kind of along those lines, 3 levels of complexity. We're not quite sure exactly what we're going to call them yet. We know that there's already a Lean Six Sigma community that's already very primed, ready to go. They're already all trained in statistics. And a lot of them know that the next level and the evolution of Lean Six Sigma is predictive modeling. And so we're fairly certain that there's a large audience there, and none of them are coders. I got to be careful, because I speak at those conferences very often. I always ask, how many of you are coders? And there's always 1 or 2 people in the back of the room. I don't know why, but they're always in the back of the room. Yes, I'm a Python coder. So it's maybe 1% or 2%. But typically that crowd is used to using software, Minitab, Jump, and other ones to solve some very serious problems. And they're very expensive pieces of software. You go to Minitab, which costs about $1,700. They have a grayed out area on their software that says predictive modeling. And you click on it, it says call your salesperson. You call your salesperson, it says they will tell you for $1,000 a month, we will allow you to access the predictive modules within Minitab. Jump is not any different. The Jump Pro version is very expensive. If you work at a company that has that, that's great. But everything we're doing through Orange and through JASP, and once in a while with Blue Sky Statistics, none of that cost anything. And we think that's where the world is going to eventually go in that direction. So yes, and we think, as Bob already said, and we're going to go down that route and of certification. We're going to try to make it as easy for people to do as possible. We'll have videos that you can access at any point. You'll have homework, you'll have questions. It should hopefully be through a learning management system so that you could, whenever you have time, let's say, for example, you're a night owl from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the morning for whatever reason you like to learn, well, you could go on there and learn. So we're just trying to create a flexible learning platform, and we'll eventually get around to that.
Yeah, so do be thinking about this and contributing by email. It helps us to design a more relevant certification for everybody. And it could be that we will do this on our own, just like Coursera, so to speak, without faculty, where you simply would take the course, get the certification, and it wouldn't be through a university. But we'll just have to see what transpires. Other thoughts as we're at the hour. I try not to hold people over too long. Unless there's a good discussion, then I'm happy to. The ebook would be much easier for us. So we're going to have to see how that pans out. I'll look at Patreon. Sadell, you had another comment?
Yeah, I was just saying, I mean, if you want me to send some resources about business canvas and how you can approach like the thinking process towards kind of selling, know who is going to be your customers, let me know. I'll send you those resources. I have a few books that are quite good on those things.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. I mean, the more information, the better for this. So, again, I appreciate your attendance and interest in this. Next month, what we'll do, we'll finish up the widgets and we'll move on to data visualization, which is always, again, a good hands-on. We finished chapter 3, so I'll be sending the entire chapter out ahead of time for your review. But if you have any input after the fact, you go home and say, I wish I would have made this recommendation or have this thought, please do email us. We do appreciate your feedback very much. And if there are no other comments or questions, then we'll go ahead and plan for the next workshop in a month. So again, thanks, and we'll see you in a month.
Thank you. Can I make a
everybody.
question and random, like one, that's a kind of a joke, but have you tried to ask GPT about what you can do in this regard?
Well, that's an interesting thought. I have not. I mean, in fact, you can use ChatGPT to explain itself. A recent article I read on ChatGPT, it said, how does an attention mechanism work? And every explanation was using ChatGPT to explain ChatGPT. So no, I think that might be an interesting question, is just say, what are my options? What are my choices? And see what it says.
Yeah, I think so. The other thing it's a little more technical. I wanted to ask about Orange, like how does it deal with missing data?
How does Orange deal with missing data?
Yeah,
it has an
option.
Yeah,
like,
you have multiple options in the imputation widget. It's just there to impute missing data, and also the pre-process widget includes imputation, how to deal with missing data. So you got 2 ways, and we'll be covering all of that.
okay.
And there's also one more thing on missing data. Some of the algorithms are so sensitive, they don't even work if there's missing data. So they have a default preprocessor built in themselves, where that they will automatically impute without you even knowing about it, so that they can function.